What if the biggest mystery in the universe isn't out there in space, but quietly happening inside your own awareness right now? Not stars, not black holes, not dark matter, but the simple fact that you are aware at all. There's a moment that happens sometimes, and it's difficult to explain unless you've felt it yourself. You're alone, maybe late at night, maybe working, maybe just sitting still, and suddenly your attention shifts, not toward a problem or a task, but toward awareness itself. You stop being aware of something, and instead, you become aware that you are aware. And in that moment, something strange happens. The part of you trained to explain things, to model reality, to break everything into systems and equations, falls completely silent. Because what you're looking at cannot be measured, cannot be described from the outside, and cannot be captured in any formula. You are looking at the inside of existence itself, and there is no established theory for that. Today, I want to explore that gap. I want to talk about consciousness, what it is, what it might be, and what physics, as we understand it today, can and cannot say about it. And I want to do this carefully, without pretending we know more than we actually do. Because the truth is simple and uncomfortable. We do not understand consciousness, not fully, not even close. And the reason may be deeper than we're willing to admit. It may be that our current framework of reality, particles, fields, forces, equations, is missing something fundamental. Not a small correction, not a missing detail, but something essential that requires us to rethink the entire picture from the ground up. Physics begins with what we know, or at least what we trust enough to build on. And what we know is remarkable. Over the past century, we've developed a framework that describes the universe at its most basic level, quantum mechanics. Everything matter, energy, forces is governed by it. Its predictions are not just accurate, they are precise beyond anything else in science, often matching experiments to 10 or more decimal places. It works. It works so well that it feels almost complete. And yet, there is something it does not describe. Something so obvious that we rarely question it, yet so fundamental that its absence in our equations should concern us deeply. Physics describes systems from the outside. It tells us how particles behave, how fields interact, how systems evolve over time. But it says nothing about what it is like to be those systems. Nothing about experience. Nothing about the fact that there is something it feels like to be you, reading this right now. This is what's known as the hard problem of consciousness. And it's important to understand why it's called hard. In physics, problems are often called hard when they are complex or difficult to compute. But those are problems that, in principle, can be solved with better tools, more data, or more refined mathematics. This is not that kind of problem. This is hard in a deeper way. Because no matter how detailed your description of a system becomes, no matter how precisely you map every neuron, every signal, every process, you still haven't explained why any of it is accompanied by experience. Why there is something it is like, rather than nothing at all. That gap between objective description and subjective experience is not shrinking, and it may not shrink with more data alone. That's the challenge. That's the tension. And in the next part, we're going to step deeper into that gap and ask a question that might change how we think about reality itself. What if consciousness isn't something that emerges, but something that was always there? What if the reason we can't explain consciousness is not because we lack enough data, but because we're asking the wrong kind of question? Because everything we've built in physics is designed to describe reality from the outside, while consciousness exists only on the inside. That mismatch may be the real problem. As a physicist, the instinct is always the same. Look for the mechanism, break things down, reduce complexity into simpler parts, explain the whole in terms of its components. This approach has worked incredibly well. It gave us atoms, then subatomic particles, then quantum fields. It explained chemistry, biology, even the large-scale structure of the universe. Reductionism is powerful. It's the backbone of modern science. But when you apply that same method to consciousness, something doesn't quite fit. Not because the brain isn't physical, it clearly is, but because the key feature of consciousness, its subjective nature, doesn't show up in the kind of descriptions physics is built to produce. You can map the brain in extraordinary detail. You can identify patterns, signals, correlations. You can even predict behavior, but none of that explains why those processes are accompanied by experience. You can describe a brain processing the color red down to every electrical impulse, every chemical exchange, but nowhere in that description do you find the redness of red. The experience itself is missing. Not hidden, missing entirely from the framework. This is where the idea begins to shift. What if consciousness is not something that emerges from matter, like temperature emerges from molecular motion? What if it is something more basic? Something like mass or charge, a fundamental property of reality itself. Now, this idea is controversial. Most physicists believe consciousness is emergent, meaning it arises from complex systems but doesn't exist at simpler levels. And that belief is reasonable. We've seen emergence explain many things that once seemed mysterious. Temperature, life, even intelligence to some degree. So it's natural to assume consciousness will follow the same path. But here's the problem. We don't yet have a convincing explanation that shows how experience emerges from non-experiential parts. We have correlations but not explanations. We know which brain regions are active during certain experiences, but we don't know why those processes feel like anything at all. So there's another possibility, one that has been gaining quiet attention in both philosophy and physics. The idea that consciousness is fundamental, that at some level, even the simplest physical systems have a minimal form of interiority. Not human-like awareness, not thoughts or emotions, but something more basic, some primitive form of being. This view is often called panpsychism. And while the name can sound strange, the core idea is actually quite straightforward. Instead of trying to build experience out of non-experience, it assumes experience is already there in a very simple form and becomes richer as systems become more complex. Think of it not as giving consciousness to everything in a human sense, but as recognizing that the distinction between the physical and the experiential might be artificial. That what we call physical properties and what we call experience could be two aspects of the same underlying reality. Some thinkers describe it this way. Every physical system has both an external description, which physics captures, and an internal aspect, which we experience directly in ourselves. Physics gives us the outside view. Consciousness is the inside view. Two sides of the same coin. If that's true, then the hard problem doesn't need to be solved in the usual way. It doesn't require building a bridge from matter to mind. It requires recognizing that the bridge was never needed because the separation itself was incomplete. Now, this doesn't mean the problem is solved. Far from it. It just reframes the question. And in science, that kind of shift can be everything. Because when a problem resists every standard approach, the solution often comes from changing the assumptions we didn't even realize we were making. And that brings us to a deeper question, one that goes beyond theory and into how we actually live. Because if consciousness is fundamental, if every person you meet is not just a body, but an entire inner world, then the way we relate to each other might be more significant than we've been treating it. And in the next part, we're going to move from physics into something more personal and explore what that realization means for a human life. If consciousness really is something fundamental, if every person you encounter is not just a physical system but a center of experience, then the implications are not just scientific. They are deeply personal. Because this isn't just a theory about the universe. It's a statement about what it means to live inside it. For a long time, I lived mostly in my head. Not in a careless or detached way, but in a way that felt productive, even meaningful. The inner world of thought is powerful. It's where ideas form, where problems are solved, where entire frameworks are built. And if you spend enough time there, it starts to feel like the most real place there is. Ideas connect to other ideas. Questions lead to deeper questions. There's always more to explore. It's an environment that never runs out. And there's a certain comfort in that. The inner world is controlled. It responds to your attention. It follows logic. It rewards focus. Compared to the unpredictability of the outside world, it feels stable and precise. You can spend years there and feel like you're moving forward, understanding more, building something meaningful. But over time, something becomes clear. As rich as that inner world is, it is incomplete, not empty, just missing something essential. And the thing it lacks is something you cannot generate on your own. It's the presence of another consciousness. There is a difference between thinking about people and actually being with them. A real difference. Not just in behavior, but in experience. When you are fully present with another person, when your attention is not divided, not drifting back into your own thoughts, something changes. You are no longer interacting with an idea of a person. You are encountering another center of awareness, another inside that is not yours. And that matters more than it first appears. Because no matter how advanced your thinking becomes, it is still self-contained. It's your own system looping through its own structures. But another person introduces something fundamentally different. They bring an entirely separate perspective, a completely independent inner world, one that you can approach, understand partially, but never fully access. And that gap, the fact that you cannot fully enter another mind, is not a limitation. It's what makes the interaction real. This is what we often refer to as connection, or presence, or even intimacy in its broadest sense. Not just emotional closeness, but the act of two conscious beings genuinely paying attention to each other. Not as roles, not as functions, but as experiences. As what it is like to be each of them. If consciousness is indeed a fundamental aspect of reality, then this interaction becomes something more than social or psychological. It becomes physical in a deeper sense. It becomes two instances of the universe's interiority coming into contact. Two separate perspectives, each rooted in the same underlying reality, reaching toward each other across a gap that can never be fully closed, but can be meaningfully bridged. And that is not a small event. It may be one of the most significant things that happens in human life. For a long time, I didn't see it that way. I treated relationships as context, not content, as something that existed around the real work, which was thinking, analyzing, understanding. Conversations were interruptions. Presence was secondary. The inner world came first. But over time, that view started to shift. Not suddenly, but gradually, through experience, through missed moments. Through realizing that there were times when I was physically present but not actually there. Times when the opportunity for real connection existed, and I chose instead to remain inside my own thoughts. And those moments matter. Not in an abstract way, but in a very concrete one. Because unlike ideas, which can be revisited and expanded later, moments of connection are time-bound. They happen once, in a specific context, between specific people. And if they are not fully experienced, they are gone. This realization doesn't reject the value of thinking. It doesn't diminish the importance of ideas. But it changes their position. It places them alongside something equally important, rather than above it. Because if consciousness is the medium in which life is lived, then the meeting of two consciousnesses is not secondary, it is central. And in the next part, we're going to explore a concept that might connect these two worlds, physics and experience, more directly. A concept that has been gaining importance in modern science, and might offer a new way to understand both reality and consciousness at the same time. If there is a bridge between physics and experience, it may not come from matter or energy in the way we usually think about them. It may come from something more abstract, yet increasingly central to modern science: information. Over the last few decades, physicists have started to take seriously the idea that information is not just a tool we use to describe reality, but something that might actually sit at the foundation of reality itself. There is a phrase that captures this shift, introduced by one of the most influential physicists of the 20th century, it from bit. The idea is simple but profound. What we call physical reality, the it, may arise from information, the bit. Not matter first, then information as a description, but information first, with matter emerging from it. In this view, the universe is not primarily made of particles or fields, but of answers to questions. Binary distinctions, yes or no, this state or that state. Now, this is not yet a complete theory. It is a direction, a framework that has proven useful in areas like quantum gravity, black hole physics, and the study of spacetime itself. It connects to ideas like the holographic principle, where the information inside a region of space can be described by data on its boundary. It also links to quantum entanglement, where the relationships between systems seem to define their structure more deeply than the systems themselves. But here's where it becomes especially interesting for our discussion. If information is fundamental, then we can ask a new kind of question. What does information look like from the outside? And what does it feel like from the inside? Physics is very good at answering the first question. It describes how information is stored, transferred, transformed. It gives us equations, probabilities, correlations. But it does not answer the second question. It does not tell us what information feels like when it is processed from within. And this is where a possibility begins to take shape. What if consciousness is what information feels like when it is organized in a certain way? Not an extra layer added on top of physical processes, but the internal aspect of those processes themselves. The first-person side of something that physics describes in third-person terms. If that's true, then consciousness is not separate from the physical world. It is not something that appears only at high levels of complexity. It is part of the same structure, seen from a different perspective. Physics gives us the outside view. Consciousness gives us the inside view, and information may be the link that connects the two. This idea has consequences. Because if consciousness is tied to information in this way, then when two conscious beings interact, something physically meaningful is happening. Not just socially, not just psychologically, but in terms of the structure of information itself. When you communicate with someone, when you share ideas, emotions, attention, you are not just exchanging signals. You are creating correlations between two complex systems. You are aligning patterns, building shared structure. In the language of physics, you are increasing the connection between two informational states. At a very abstract level, you could even say that something like entanglement is taking place, not in the strict quantum mechanical sense used in laboratories, but as an analogy. Two systems that were once separate become linked through shared information. Their future states become more connected because of that interaction. And this brings us back to something more personal, because when you look at your own life, you can probably recall moments when this kind of connection either happened or didn't. Conversations where you were fully present, where something meaningful was exchanged, and others where you were physically there but mentally elsewhere. Those missed moments are not neutral. They represent lost opportunities for connection, for alignment, for shared understanding. And unlike data in a computer, which can be copied or recreated, these moments are tied to time. They happen once, and then they are gone. Time, in physics, has a direction. Entropy increases, systems evolve forward, and in human life, that means moments pass and do not return. The conversation you didn't fully engage in, the person you didn't fully listen to, the connection you didn't allow to form, those are not events you can revisit later in the same way. This doesn't mean regret should dominate how we think about the past. But it does mean that the present moment carries a kind of weight. It is not just one instance among many. It is a specific configuration of people, thoughts, and possibilities that will not repeat in exactly the same way again. And if consciousness is indeed the medium through which all of this is experienced, then how we use our attention, where we place it, how fully we engage, becomes one of the most important choices we make. Because attention is what determines whether a moment becomes meaningful or just passes unnoticed. In the next part, we're going to bring all of this together, the physics, the philosophy, and the personal, and confront a question that sits at the center of it all. If consciousness is as fundamental as it might be, what does that mean for how we understand our place in the universe, and more importantly, how we choose to live within it? If we take everything we've explored so far seriously, the limits of physics, the possibility that consciousness is fundamental, and the idea that information may connect the inner and outer views of reality, then we arrive at a point that is both scientific and deeply human. Because this is no longer just about theories. It becomes about how a life is actually lived. At some point, the question shifts. It's no longer only what is consciousness, but what does it mean that I am conscious right now in this moment? Because whatever consciousness ultimately turns out to be in the language of physics, fundamental property, emergent process, or something we don't yet have the words for, it is the medium through which everything in your life is experienced. Every thought, every perception, every relationship, every decision, it all happens within consciousness. Without it, nothing has weight, nothing matters. The most elegant equation, the most precise prediction, the most beautiful symmetry in physics means nothing unless there is an experience in which that meaning appears. Consciousness is not just another topic within science. It is the reason anything can matter at all. And this brings us back to something simple but easy to overlook, the fact that you are an inside, a first-person perspective on reality, and so is every person you encounter. Each one carries a full inner world, thoughts, feelings, memories, interpretations that you can never completely access. You can understand parts of it, you can connect to it, but you can never fully step inside it. That separation is real. It cannot be removed, but it can be approached, and the effort to approach it, to understand another person, to be present with them, to listen and respond with attention, is not a secondary activity. It is not something that happens after the important work is done. It is itself the important work. Because if consciousness is even partly fundamental, then these interactions are not just social exchanges. They are moments where two distinct perspectives on reality come into alignment, however briefly. Moments where the universe, in a very real sense, becomes aware of itself through the connection between two minds. Breathe bare, that may sound abstract, but it has very practical consequences. It changes how we think about attention, because attention is limited. At any given moment, you can direct it inward, toward your own thoughts, or outward, toward the people and environment around you. And neither direction is wrong. Both are necessary. But the balance matters. For a long time, I leaned heavily toward the inner direction, toward thinking, analyzing, building models, exploring ideas. And again, that has value. It leads to understanding. It produces knowledge. It allows us to explain the world in ways that would otherwise remain hidden. But it can also become isolating. Not in an obvious way, but in a subtle one. Because the more time you spend inside your own thoughts, the easier it becomes to treat other people as background, as part of the environment, rather than as centers of experience equal to your own. And that shift has consequences. Not immediately, not dramatically, but over time. It changes the quality of interactions. It reduces the depth of connection. It creates a distance that isn't always visible, but is still there. What I've come to understand, slowly and not always easily, is that the moments of real connection, the times when you are fully present with another person, are not interruptions to your life. They are the substance of it. They are not distractions from meaning. They are where meaning actually forms. This doesn't require abandoning thought or intellectual work. It doesn't mean stepping away from science or analysis. It means recognizing that those things exist within a larger context. A context defined by experience, by awareness, by the fact that we are conscious beings interacting with other conscious beings. And once you see that clearly, something changes. The present moment becomes more specific, less interchangeable, less like one instance among many, and more like a unique configuration that will not repeat in exactly the same way again. You begin to notice when your attention drifts, when you are physically present but mentally elsewhere, when a conversation becomes automatic instead of engaged, and you begin gradually to correct for that. Not perfectly, not all at once, but as a practice of returning attention to what is actually happening, to the person in front of you, to the moment that is unfolding. Because whatever consciousness turns out to be in the equations of the future, right now it is the space in which your life is taking place, and how you use it determines what that life becomes. And in the final part, we're going to bring this full circle back to physics, back to the original question, and to a conclusion that is less about answers and more about what we choose to do with the awareness we have.